So without further ado, please join me in turning the stage over to Susan Shapiro.
Thank you so much. So I thought, while we're waiting for one more panelist, I thought what I'll do is tell you a little bit about the book, and I'm going to read a short section from it. And by that time, Alison will be here, and then I'll introduce all the panelists. So the Forgiveness Tour, How to Find the Perfect Apology. It began, as a lot of you know, when, oh, there she is. Hi, Alison.
I'm sorry to keep you waiting.
That's okay. So I'm just going to do a short reading, and then I'm going to introduce all the panelists. So this book started when I had a bad falling out with somebody in my life who I was very close to and cared about, and he would not apologize. And for 6 months, I was very upset, trying to figure out how do I forgive somebody who won't apologize. So I'm going to read a section towards the end of the book, and then I'll introduce all the panelists. And this section is called What I Couldn't See. I needed a new shrink to get over my old shrink. After falling out with Dr. Winters, my addiction specialist for 15 years, I couldn't work, eat, or sleep. At a charity event, I met Vatsal, an Indian-born psychiatrist who agreed to a talk therapy session where I spilled the details of my rupture with Dr. Winters, hoping Vatsal could untangle the estrangement. Why would he lie to me, I asked, still distressed 6 months later. If you build up a man inappropriately, he has to fall, Vatsal said. Is that an Indian saying? Sounds Yiddish. You're saying Winters is just human? When he helped you quit smoking, drinking, and drugs, you imbued him with a supernatural power. Vatsal spoke slowly, paternal, though we were both in our 40s. Yes, it seemed like magic, I conceded. His sterile Midtown office had a bright fluorescent. You need a lamp with a dimmer switch, I suggested. Did I tell you Winters was born in August? He's a Leo like my father. Are you into astrology? Do you have ADD? Vatsal asked. You speak so quickly. You speak so slowly, I laughed. Good, he was chilling me out. I wanted the Winters saga to go back to being a swashbuckling fable about the heroic addiction doctor healing me. I needed it to be funny again, not scary and tragic. At home, I received an email from Winters. It felt like male radar, the way an ex would call minutes after you meet their replacement. Things are not how you see them. I have never wanted to do anything but help you, he wrote. I didn't know what I was seeing wrong. My blood knotted in my veins. I shared the email with Vatsal at our next session, confessing I'd been so enraged at Dr. Winters, I'd even put a Yiddish curse on him. Listen, you've lived through more emotional cycles with him than anybody else, Vatsal said. You trusted him, loved him, idolized him, felt betrayed, hated him, killed him off. Now you're in mourning. He added, it will be intriguing to learn the last chapter. What if after 15 years we never speak again, I asked. That's not the ending, Vatsal said. Here's a metaphor. A commuter was enraged when a woman in an SUV stopped abruptly to get something in the back seat, almost causing an accident. He didn't know the driver's infant was choking. Similarly, there's something you don't know about Dr. Winters' life that will shed light on why he hurt you. What religion are you, I asked. My family is Hindu. Is that Hinduistic? I was an immigrant and outsider. With an Eastern bent, we're open to more possibilities, he said. Do you think Winters could tell me something that would fix us? Is that what you want? I want him to understand why I'm upset, explain the reasons he lied, offer to return to being my shrink, and then I'll say no. The Rolls Royce of endings, Vatsal smiled. At our next appointment, I found an Art Deco lamp with a dimmer switch. You've been enlightened. It's not symbolic. I just needed better lighting in here. As a temporary consultant for 6 sessions, Vatsal reminded me that things could coexist. Dr. Winters could be a generous, kind person who helped me for 15 years while also hurting me for reasons I didn't understand. Through my colleague Paloma's Hindu Mother's Canadian Vendetta chapter, I was granted 10 minutes on the phone with her Swami. I heard forgiveness is a cardinal virtue for Hindus, I said. Truth is one, but the wise speak of it differently, he said. If someone offended me but didn't apologize, would you advise forgiving anyway? For us, God is immanent in everyone, even the person who offended you. Holding resentment against him, and thus God keeps you stuck in what we call the veils of Maya, which we see as ignorance and delusion, away from enlightenment. So I can't see the whole picture, I repeated Vatsal's theory. Yes, we are often mistaken about what we think we are, he said. Holding on to anger is poison, forgiving is nectar. An angry grudge is like fighting a fire that destroys the place where it's lit. It burns your own heart first. My heart was burning. To fight my ignorance, I had to douse the internal flames and undo the Yiddish curse I cast on him. I lit a salt purple candle, placing it atop the World's Religion book on my desk. Swaying to Macy Gray's On How Life Is, I read Eastern karmic principles of ricocheting goodness and Confucius's reminder to hold on to kindness more than wounds. I thought of the Jewish and Christian concept of the book of life, deciding his past kindness outweighed his desertion, steaming our bad blood over. I willed my memories back to the best of my one-time advisor while whispering goodbye. After 6 months, I didn't need him or my anger towards him anymore. I forgave him, surpassed him, and left him to move on. The veils of Maya were lifted, or maybe male radar struck again, letting him know I was out the door, because right after my forgiveness dance and last thought cell session in March, I received another email from Dr. Winters. I'm sorry, he wrote. I never meant to hurt you. Anyway, so as I was writing this book, because I lost my guru who helped me with everything for 15 years, I needed help from other gurus. And what I did was I not only interviewed a lot of religious leaders in this book, but I also went to my colleagues and writers and some students who had written really beautifully about hurts that they had where they didn't receive the apology that they deserved. So now I'll introduce the panelists who've all written on this subject, and I'm thrilled they could join us tonight. So Sharisse Tracey, who is a former student of mine, has been published in the New York Times and Ebony and in Roxanne Gray's anthology, Not That Bad, is here. Kate Walter, who's a colleague who taught at NYU, who has published a lot of short pieces in all the different newspapers, and she's the author of the great memoir, Looking for a Kiss, from Heliotrope Books. Emillio Mesa is a former student of mine who has written for the New York Times, New York Magazine, Huffington Post, Forbes, and San Francisco Chronicle, San Francisco Magazine. Kenan Trebincevic is the author of The Bosnia List and the upcoming middle grade book, World in Between. And Alison Singh, who's joining us from California, is a award-winning international journalist and is the author of a beautiful memoir called Where the Peacocks Sing, out from St. Martin's. So what I'm going to do, if you guys don't mind, is I'm just going to jump in and ask you the questions that I asked you in the book. And I wrote about all of these people. I wrote chapters about all these people. So Emillio, let's start with you. And I have a chapter in my book that's called When Tragedy Offers You a Second Chance. And it's actually based on a New York Times piece that Emillio wrote, which tells a very intense story about how Emilio's mother left him in the Dominican Republic for 6 years as a kid when she came to New York. And that always bothered him, and he always wanted an explanation or an apology. And he eventually moved here. And at age 30, he was attacked and beaten up very badly. And his mother took her into his home and took care of them. And in those months when she was taking care of him, it seemed as if he was able to reconcile. So Emillio, could you tell us a little bit about that story? And what I love the most about it is that there was a second chance, that through love, you were able to reconnect. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. But first and foremost, I could have never published that piece without you, because it was the most cathartic moment of my life. So it was very, very powerful, and it helped me a lot and saved me a lot of money in therapy. But absolutely, it absolutely was. And we had to sit down, after I was mugged and assaulted, and when I couldn't take care of myself, and I literally had to go back to her home because I couldn't, pay for my rent or my cell phone bill or anything. And we reconciled during that time, and she asked me to apologize. She apologized to me, and I said, I forgive you. And the reason that I did forgive her was because at that moment, after she expressed her entire lifetime, which I was not aware of, was because, unfortunately, my story is not unique. I am the same as many child of immigrants, whose mothers and fathers have to leave them in their birthland with their, cousins, grandparents, whatever, for them to come to, to the US to make a better life. But it wasn't until I saw, and after she told me her whole story, that I didn't see her as a mother. I didn't see her as a daughter or a wife or, like a business person or anything. I saw her as a woman. I saw her as a person and saw her struggles. And she was very earnest, and very forthcoming.
You were 30 years old when this was happening?
Correct.
And you said that it was through her taking care of you, seeing her love for you at 30, that you were able to somehow overcome some of the childhood hurt?
Yes, absolutely. And it was through all of that I was able to see her, like I said, as a person. And we reconciled, and she asked me to forgive her. And I said, absolutely so. And I said, thank you, because it changed my life.
Yeah, and so what happens right now is, I think it's sort of strange that the book took 10 years to come out, and it's hitting at a time when so many people are hurting because of the pandemic and contentious politics in families. And so what I loved about your story was that it wasn't too late. And what's interesting is that you probably never really asked her before this time to explain to you the whole story. So it's kind of interesting that when you were in an emergency situation and she took care of you, you had more of a chance to talk about what happened. So I love the idea that there always could be a second chance.
I mean, absolutely. Every single word you just said. Yes.
You guys are really close right now, right?
Very much so. Yes.
Awesome. I love that story. Okay, so then Alison in her book, Where the Peacocks Sing, wrote sort of the hilarious, beautiful, fun part of joining a fascinating Indian family. But through other things she's written and through conversations we had, it turned out there was something harder that had gone on in the family, which was that her Indian mother-in-law had inadvertently made disparaging comments about the fact that her daughter looked Chinese and not Indian. And there was some hurt that had happened. And what I love the most about Alison's story is that eventually they were able to kind of forgive each other without the apology. And Alison told me, I have worked hard to forgive her. And Alison found a way to let the kindness that she showed her daughter stand in for the words that her mother-in-law couldn't say. So could you tell us a little bit about that? And I'm especially intrigued with, I have worked hard to forgive her. So could you tell us a little bit about how one goes about forgiving someone like that?
Absolutely. And I hope you don't mind me saying I'm really enjoying the book. I think it has a very profound message, while at the same time being so entertaining, because it's dropping us into the life of Sue. So I am really, really enjoying it. It's a very meaningful book. So what I want to say is, my book, the most dynamic relationship in my memoir is actually about my relationship with my mother-in-law, who's an incredibly complex, very flawed person, as are we all. And I think it's in my forgiveness of her and her maybe acceptance of me in the book that we both really evolve as people. So I have to say there was nothing inadvertent about her comments about the way my daughter looked. She really did say, she said to my husband, she looks nothing like us. She looks everything like Alison's mother, which is Chinese. And, that really, really stung, because here is a precious, pure child who, I can't remember if she'd met her grandmother yet. No, she had not, but who would come to her Indian grandmother with an open heart. And this is what her grandmother says to her. And so I think the way I tried to perceive it is I tried to get underneath it, had to do with something somebody said to me, a man who was Jewish but raised in India said to me, what is underneath those words? Don't look at the words at face value, but what is underneath them? And when I thought about that, I thought, here's a woman who, until my marriage to her son, had never been out of her own country, who was so unworldly, yes, she was of an upper class, but she was only educated to a certain degree. What did she know? I was probably the first Chinese person she ever kind of had a conversation with, because she actually wouldn't talk to me. So I had to really examine that, and I think the first step towards forgiveness is empathy. So to really understand who you're seeking an apology from is so important. And I also want to say that on this journey, in conversations with Ajay, who's my Indian husband, I came to understand that a spoken apology is a very Western concept.
And also, if you don't mind, because of you, I looked up Confucius, and there was a beautiful line that I love, which said, "Remember the kindness more than the wounds." And you did say that at a certain point, she did adore your daughter, and that you tried to take all the good stuff and make that bigger and the hurt smaller, which I thought was kind of poetic.
I love that. Thank you for reminding me of that wisdom. And yes, I think that's really important, is to look at the situation as a whole and not to hold on just to the words that hurt, but to really look at people's actions. And so when we were in India, even though, I come from a very, American, maybe Chinese American point of view, where things should be done a certain way, and she believed that the world should be run according to Indian beliefs. The middle ground was really seeing her in action and how much she did for us, how much she sacrificed her time, her leisure time, her, her whatever limited finances for us. And that went a far way for me to empathize with her and care for her.
I love that. I found that extremely helpful. And actually that helped me, because when I wound up being able to forgive Dr. Winters without an apology, it was because I tried to put together 15 years of kindness. I kept trying to focus on that. So that really helped me. Okay, Kenan Trebincevic, I'm so glad you could be here, my co-author for Bosnia List and our new book, World in Between. Now, you have such an amazing story. So at age 12, as a Bosnian Muslim, you were exiled from your country when the Christian Orthodox Serbs basically had conducted an ethnic cleansing campaign against your people. And Kenan, early on when I met him, was still enraged at 30 because there had never been an official apology. The war ended in stalemate. There were no reparations. It was just thrown out of your country. Deal with it. And so Kenan, part of what I love so much about your story was the first element that I thought was fascinating is, as you were writing about it, even though you never got the apology that you deserved from the Serbs and the government, you did at one point write a list of all the Serbs in your world who actually went out of their way to help you survive. And would you mind, I remember there was a bus driver who waited for you, and there was somebody who gave you money. Could you mention that? Like, was it hard for you to even remember that there were little specks of goodness that did help you?
Remember, as you and I did the book together, as we were writing the chapters and extrapolating all the pieces that came out in newspapers and individual chapters, as we did it together through interviews and me doing it at home, I had to relive the moments, but make sense out of them as an adult this time. And there's always like another aha moment at the end of a chapter. So when I was 12 years old, only thing I saw was physicality around me, but there was so much confusion, at a time. So I was able to, towards the end of the book, acknowledge all the Serbs who came to help our family. And one of the things, as you know, the book, and for those who haven't read it, it's about how my Bosnian Muslim family survived ethnic cleansing during the Balkan War in 1992, and how I went back for the first time in 20 years to grant my father a wish, not only to reconnect with our past, but to confront our neighbors and friends who betrayed us. And one of the people that I acknowledged at the end of the book was a family that we visited that lived below us. And as a boy, I didn't understand how he would come home with a uniform and his gun was always warm. While him and his wife were feeding us, he was shooting our people. So that's one of the things I wanted to ask him when we met, and we had like a long conversation. And as you mentioned, there was never any reparation. acknowledgement. I think that those are all important aspects to receive an apology. And nationalism till today has continued in the country, and younger generation is actually worse than the one that I grew up with. But I realized, my mother said, is to treat people for who they are and not who they are. And there were always these little guardian angels that came to our help, like the bus driver who waited for us when we got kicked out of the checkpoints. And if it wasn't for him, the guy who kept us might have shot at us and sent us back home for the 6th time because we tried leaving for 7 times. There's another time as a soldier who recognized my father at another checkpoint, who basically got attention of the other soldiers, so he didn't pay too much attention to us. There's also another family who saw me outside. They didn't know where we stayed, and she made sure that my mom had coffee and some canned products. So since I was the only one able to leave the house, I was under 18 years old, and I wouldn't be ID'd like my father would, because we were occupied. I would go to her house every week, and she would, give us some food. And she was a Serb Orthodox, lady. So
Your mother used to say to you, I remember, that there's good in all people. And
yes,
yeah, so that even though they were the enemy, there were enough people to save your family, which I thought was important. And then Kenan, another thing I love about your story was, instead of forgiving, you never forgave really, but you became a spokesperson for your people by writing about the injustice. And would you say that was empowering?
yeah, it was nice to bring country back on a map, especially for the people who didn't have the voice. And so I would get emails or Facebook messages from people who thanked me for writing a book, and they felt the similar way that I have, and they never felt comfortable bringing up as a conversation at dinner with their family. So it gave them more, empowered them to bring up and ask about their past, especially those, especially generation who's younger than me, who were born here, and they go once a year to Bosnia, and they're maybe now teenagers or 20 years old, so they weren't born at the time. So they never really understand what happened in the country or why they came, and their parents never really wanted to talk about it for whatever reason. I guess they never wanted to relive through it, or didn't want their kids to know about it. So that brought out a lot of conversation. And also, if it wasn't for the book, I wouldn't have met my wonderful wife, right? As you know, I know you're gonna bring that up. So
I'm going to ask if I'm allowed to. So one of the people who loved the book and wrote Kenan turned out to be Mirala, who's now his wife. And I always say, if you hadn't faced down your past, you wouldn't have found your future.
yeah, and then you always said to me, I think one of the first classes you did, I think in a nice way, I called Americans nosy. I said, why would anybody want to read my story? And you said, because editors love unusual voices and it can help you heal. So one of the great things you tell your students is that you can take your work's experience and turn it into beautiful art.
Cool. You listen. Good. Cool. All right. Well, Sharisse, who's also a former student, Sharisse has written some very beautiful, provocative pieces, not only about being a mother of 4, and at one point an army wife and moving around, but she's written some really intense pieces about having been sexually assaulted by her father. And that's what she wrote about in Roxanne Gay's anthology, Not That Bad, and a piece for Ebony. And I was so blown away by how brave you were to write about it. And actually what fascinated me the most in terms of healing, Sharisse told me how her father passed away, and she really felt that her mother owed her an apology and an explanation for how could you have stayed with this person and why didn't you protect me? But unable to get the exact apology that she wanted, as Sharisse was writing pieces, Sharisse's mother is a great editor. So as Sharisse was writing about this, she would give the pieces to her mother about what happened to her and how she felt, and the mother would line edit and copy edit for her. And I remember at a certain point, Sharisse told me it was painful for her, but she did it for me. And what I loved about it was it almost felt like that was a way for you to, like you were determined to tell your story and have her understand it. And by her helping you, there was some kind of a healing that seemed to take place. So could you tell us a little bit about that, Sharisse?
I will try. Thank you. Yeah, that's, I don't know if it was designed to be that way, but how my mother actually started helping me. I've shared this before. My mother's a writer. She writes poetry. And I never really thought I was really good in English. So anytime I wrote anything, I would ask her to look it over. So obviously when I'm writing this story, I'm thinking she's the last person I can ask for help. But she had the details that I didn't. She had, you know, the parts of my memory that I just couldn't access. You know, I had the overall story and the really horrific parts, but there were just things that I didn't know, and she filled me in. And I just thought, wow, you know, this is pretty powerful, because it's painful for both of us, but yet you're helping me in a way. So that's kind of how she started reading and editing my pieces. And no, it wasn't this year. No, it happened this way. And I mean, it was kind of amazing to me that she could do that. And I honestly didn't ever think when I was giving her the pieces that it would hurt her. I know that may sound strange. I just really wasn't thinking about her in those moments. I was thinking about me and my story and trying to get it right. And she was the only other person that knew the full story that was alive to tell it. So I really wasn't thinking about how it was affecting her until one day she just came out and told me. I guess I had written something that I hadn't actually told her back in 1984 that was pretty mind-blowing to her. And so we kind of both had to relive it. So it's just kind of strange how it came to be. But as I've said to you, Susan, she reads everything I write. I'm actually at her house right now, ironically, and it feels really strange having this conversation, talking about this subject with her on the other side of the wall, because there's a part of me that's always worried about hurting her again. But you know,
Well, actually, there was another part of your story that I love that actually reminded me a little bit of Alison's, which is at one point when you had 4 kids, one with special needs that you wrote about, your mother moved in with you, and she used to wake up really early in the morning, and she would make breakfast, make your favorite breakfast. And what fascinated me was that you couldn't actually get the words that you wanted. You couldn't have the conversation that you've been dying to hear. And yet she was doing all these things to show you that she loved you, but she just was not capable of having that conversation that you wanted. So could you talk about that? Like, did the fact that you saw that she loved you and your kids and that she would make you food, was there a point where you just said, okay, she's never going to be able to have the conversation that I want, but look what she's doing, and I'm going to let that count as love?
I mean, maybe. I mean, the thing is, and I've said this, I've always known that she loves me, that she loved me, that she loves me. That was what made it more painful to understand how something like that could happen. So yes, when I was, I think it was when I was coming to the new school and she was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, because I was up until 1 o'clock in the morning from coming back from school or writing or whatever. And yeah, she went out of her way, even when physically she wasn't at her best, which is why she lived with us, to just do whatever she could for me. So yes, I started to see it that way. Like, you know, she couldn't do what I needed her to do in 1984. She couldn't do it again in 1986. But this is what she can do now. And this is kind of, we'll just go with it. I mean, I can't really explain it any more than that. I think she probably lives every day in some way trying to make up for something that you can't make up for.
Great, but I love that story because you two are obviously, you're close, you're there. She did help you. So again, it was a story of healing for me in a lot of ways. And Kate Walter, both Alison and Kate are also writing teachers. And so Kate, in her hilarious memoir, Looking for a Kiss, diagrams the breakup of her 26-year relationship with her girlfriend, who not only left in a cruel way, but reneged on financial promises and never apologized. And what I loved about Kate's story is that Kate never got the apology and the explanation that she wanted, but I love the fact that Kate actually found ways to move on. And it was almost like she healed out of spite. Like she just did all these things to herself. And I just thought it was so interesting. And I remember in the book, you talk about finding a cool new church and tarot cards and a Jungian astrologer and dancing and yoga and getting a great new apartment and publishing your first book at age 66. So I just sort of love the idea that you could never get the apology you want, never forgive, and still say, fuck you, I'm going to thrive anyway. So how, I mean, how did you fight through that? How did you get to a
Well,
place?
that's basically the gist of it. I mean, the first few years were really hard. I also have a great therapist, Dr. R, who's a character in the book. She really helped me. I was like going to this tarot reader psychic a lot, trying to get information. And it was kind of funny because it was like they were sort of bouncing off each other with information and ideas. But joining Middle Collegiate Church was really a big turning point. Sue interviewed Reverend Jackie, my pastor in the book. That was just an incredible thing. That was a big turnaround. I also went to the Omega Institute a lot. I did a lot of workshops, you know, raising my vibes, law of attraction. I mean, I know it sounds kind of woo-woo, but it was really like a spiritual journey to heal myself. And I guess you could say it was partly spite, but also I was determined I want to feel better and I'm not going to let this ruin my life.
And at a certain point, did you just give up on the fantasy that you were going to get the apology that you wanted? I think at
Yeah.
one point.
Yeah, I gave up on that. I don't know at what point, but it became obvious. I'm not going to get an apology. I'm not going to get an explanation. I'm not going to get anything that I want from her.
What
And
I
then-
loved in the chapter was I asked you, would you tell me the apology that you want? And I thought it was so cathartic and fascinating to have you tell me the apology that
Right,
you deserve to get. Did that
Right.
help to
right. Well, that's in your book, Sue, because when you interviewed me, you said, what's the apology you would like to get? And I'm like, oh, here it is. I wrote it out. So that's in Sue's book in my chapter, the apology I never got that I made up.
Great. All right. Well, I loved everybody writing about it. And I had some more questions. So a lot of people have mentioned therapy and different things you do. Is there, because I basically think, as I said, it's just been the worst year of many people's lives and there's been a lot of loss on every level. So I love the idea of there are ways to get over a hurt without getting the apology that you want. So can we talk about maybe other ways? How do you get over a hurt when you can't sit down with the person and ask them a million questions and you know, is there anything else you could think of? So Emillio, you did tell me that before you were able to really have that heart-to-heart conversation with your mom, you did say that the fact that she was taking care of you, that was helping, right?
Oh, absolutely, because it bridged that gap from the time that I didn't see her from the time when she left me when I was a year old, when she came back when I was 6 years old. So that bridged that gap, and she was incredibly maternal and protective, and she even paid my bills because I had to move out of my apartment because I couldn't afford it. I lost my job, you know, because I couldn't perform. So she took care of that and everything else, and for my therapy as well, and PTSD and all that stuff. So it was a very, very powerful moment. And
How long did you move back in with her for? You moved back in with her as an adult. So how long was that?
I'm sorry, you froze from my end. What?
You moved back in with her in the Bronx. You said you live with her. How long did you live with her again for?
A year and 4 months.
Wow. Because part of me wonders, I know during the pandemic, a lot of people are sort of living multi-generationally. I wonder if sometimes that could be a way to heal, you know, to really have an extended time period where you're with, because didn't you tell me that, you know, she'd be changing your bandages in the middle of the night, and there were sort of all these moments where you got a chance to be with her in a way that you wouldn't have?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my bandages, and for the first almost 3 weeks, like, it was very hard for me to even bathe myself because I was very damaged, you know, because I had a head concussion and my legs were hurt, and also she also paid for my teeth because all my front teeth are fake because my teeth were broken and my lip was split in 2 parts. I had 9 stitches in my mouth, and I have all the pictures and everything, which is going in my memoir. But she held for all of that because for the first month, I basically just mumbled. I had to like write things out because I couldn't speak them. And then it took 4 months to get my teeth fixed because I had a lot of internal swelling. So I had to take a lot of antibiotics, and I'm not that kind of person that meshes well with medication. So I had a really, really bad reaction, but until I healed with that, I couldn't have my teeth fixed. And so, yeah, so she helped with all of that.
Wow, yeah, and I'm just in terms of healing with other people, sometimes I think that maybe just, I mean, I used to go stay with my mom for a few weeks or a month, so sometimes I wonder, could that possibly help? You know, that's fascinating. So Alison, is there anything else that you could think of in terms of, I know you said, again, it really stayed with me that you worked hard to forgive her, and the Confucius saying that you have to remember the kindness more than the wounds. Is there anything else that you could mention that helped you, that might help other people going through rough time who can't, and by the way, families and in-laws, that can be really difficult. So is there any other advice that you could give based on what you went through?
That's such a great question. I have to say too that I'm from a really big family. There are 6 kids in my family, and so I have 5 siblings, and there's always some crazy war going on. And so that was a great training ground for dealing with the Singhs. And so one thing I learned about compassion and forgiveness is the old aphorism that you can't change everything, you can only change things within yourself. And so I guess a big part of forgiveness or moving forward for me is just realizing that however somebody else feels, it does not have to be part of how I feel about myself. And I also think that if like one of my great life journeys is to become a person of character, that is more important than holding on to spite or anger. And so I feel like, I mean, I said in chat, I'm really no icon of forgiveness. In fact, like the other day I was having a conversation with a person who's a good friend who I consider an elder. And I turned to him because I don't have an elder in Mrs. Singh or other people. And I said to him, what would you do in this situation with a friend who's really sort of complicated? He said, I'm listening to my grandmother, and she would say, who's famous, like famously wise. And he said, and she would say, cut it off, cut off the relationship. So I'm also about like protecting oneself. But in the case of my mother-in-law, really can't cut it off. So what can I do? I can accept her, and I could be the bigger person, and I could be a shining light, I hope, and deal with her with humor and with some love. And what I always like to say in my book is, I think by the end of our journey in the book, that we didn't necessarily love each other, but we realized that our destinies were intertwined. So what are we going to do with that? It's like being handcuffed to someone you kind of don't want to be around. So that was my big journey towards like, I got to do something positive here. So.
I love that. And I remember at one point my shrink said to me, someone else's limitations don't have to limit you. So I love that it's, you have a choice in how you deal with it. Sharisse, so is there anything else that you could, I think we talked about therapy at one point, clearly writing about it. Is there anything else that helped you heal and, be such a good mom to your kids?
Well, I mean, I've been in and out of therapy for as long as I can remember. So therapy definitely helps. I think writing probably has been the most, not to get emotional, try to keep it together. But I think, going to the new school, meeting you, being in your class and writing about this was probably the best thing that I could have done for myself. But what motivates me outside of just loving, my mother is my daughter. I mean, I do have 4 kids, but I have one daughter, and she was really the inspiration behind wanting to tell the story for so many reasons, but just wanting her to know kind of the things that I went through to become her mother and why I want to mother her the way that I do. So even though I couldn't have known I was going to have a daughter, I really think that that's kind of my reason. And I really do, I strive to forgive because it's necessary, even though it's not easy. It's really not, but it's necessary just to move on.
Great. And Kenan, At one point, when I was interviewing a therapist for a New York Times piece, and we were talking about reconciliations and healing, and she said one of the first things she likes to suggest is that somebody ask questions and gather more information, and sometimes insight comes from that. And I felt that way when you were doing the Bosnia list. You contacted some people from your past and asked questions that you always wanted to know. And in particular, you did a piece for Slate about Pero. So maybe could you talk about that? Were there illuminating things in going back to your past and asking questions that you always wondered about? Are you, I think you're muted, Kenan.
I was, sorry. Well, I always looked up to him. He was my hero. I always wanted to be like him. He looked like a rock star wearing leather jacket and always be surrounded with cool people. And then when the book came out, these Bosnians, like males, like my brother's age and a little older, contacted me through Facebook and said, "Are you kidding, Pero?" And then they started telling me all these stories, who he really was during the war, even, I mean, especially before the war.
This was bad. This was bad Pero?
Yeah, bad Pero.
Bad Pero.
Always feeling inferior, jealous. So when the war started, he went after the people who had the girlfriends, the cars, and he started murdering them. And I realized that, this was not personal. I couldn't complain that, why did he go after me? Because as I was writing a book, I felt, what did I do wrong that he came to our house and threw us out and threw my dad in?
This was Kenan's karate coach, who as a kid he idolized, and then it turned out he was a really bad guy, and he came to the family's door with an AK-47 and said, you have an hour to leave or we're going to kill you. And so Kenan, by finding out who he was less painful because you realized he didn't hate you. He was just a hateful person.
When they did profiling on Nazis, they looked into their past and they saw who they really were before the war. all the criminals, low lives. They're the ones who they got the weapons, and it brought the worst out of people. And I came to the realization that war brings the worst or best out of you. In his case, it wasn't just him, it was these other people as well. But there's also a good pair in the story that I contacted who was the last person to save our family because he gave us permission through paperwork to leave the country, and he called the checkpoints. And when I contacted him, and I was always wondering how come he wasn't listed as a war criminal, because he was in charge of police station that harbored all the criminals. And he told me that he actually personally stayed away from them, and he was actually scared of his own people, and nothing was ever bad found about him. And I really respect him, and till this day, we stay in touch once a year. He really loved my dad, and he says all the great things. And to add to the story, he's actually, after the war, he found a Muslim girl that he was dating, and he left a Serb girl, and he found a Muslim one in a refugee camp after the war, and he married her. So
in your case, doing research and finding more information really was illuminating, enlightening for you in some ways, right?
Yeah, it was. I realized these people were not who they really were, who I saw, and I was too young to understand that. So it really made sense. It made it less painful that a bad person would do something like that, because it was obviously expected.
Cool. And Kate, is there anything in particular? So I love that you joined a new church. Joining a new church.
I forgot to say that the whole good thing about the breakup was that it healed my relationship with my mother, which is major, because after the breakup, I was just devastated and I didn't want to be in New York. So I went to the Jersey Shore almost that entire summer, where I hung out with my mother at the beach house, and my mother was great. She was like, "Oh my God, this is just like getting a divorce." And I felt like for the first time, well, maybe the first time, she got me and she saw me. And she helped me, and it was just completely cathartic. We hung out together, we did stuff together all summer, and it completely changed our relationship. And then, she died in 2017. So we had 10 really good years of having a positive relationship. And who knows if that would have happened if it wasn't for the breakup. We always had this, like I said, stormy relationship. I was the rebellious middle child.
Kate, and if you don't mind, for people that don't know the background, Kate has written really beautiful stuff about coming from a conservative Catholic family in New Jersey,
right?
Which is kind of homophobic. And so when she came out and was Greenwich Village Dyke and a cool journalist, that was complicated for your family.
Yeah.
But the fact that after your breakup, your mom really understood and helped you through it, that was like a huge lifetime reconciliation. It seems
it was a lifetime reconciliation, and it, like I said, it completely changed our relationship. And then, I mean, my father was gone by the time I had the breakup. He was dead. But I'm saying it brought us closer. And it was like, then we would do all these fun things. We would go to thrift shops together, and we really like hung out, and we hung out on the beach reading our books. It completely changed our relationship. And so I felt it was a kind of a blessing in a weird way, because I don't know if that would have happened if it wasn't for the breakup, because I was like this very, like, I was just a wreck. And my mother is really good when you're a wreck. I mean, I was always this strong personality, but when I was like completely a wreck, she just like lifted me up. And so it completely changed our relationship. So I'm really grateful for that. And then we had like 10 good years till she died.
Yeah.
And that was all related to the breakup. So she really helped me.
And I really
And the
love
rest of my family too.
Yeah, no, and I love the
And
story.
friends.
Different ways that people healed without necessarily getting the apology that they needed or deserved. That doesn't mean you can't completely heal and and have other relationships that fill in. So one more question I'll ask, and then we're going to we'll go to the new Zoom, which will be interactive so we could see everybody. But so Joan Didion says writing is a hostile, aggressive act. And I always say to my students, as Kenan mentioned, that writing is a way to turn your worst experiences into the most beautiful. So all of you have written great, amazing work about some of the stuff we're talking about now, and sort of bravely, facing some pain and difficulties. And so what I want to know is, why does the writing help? Is it the writing itself, like the act of writing, just to get it out, or is it sharing it in classes and in workshops? Is it the validation of getting paid for your writing and having the work out there? So what is it about the writing? And maybe is there anything in terms of, I have a lot of students and other writers who are listening tonight, and I think a lot of friends and colleagues who are going through rough stuff. And I do think that writing about it, and the first assignment I give my students is write about your most humiliating secret, which is actually why I found out about the stories that I used for Sharisse and Emillio and Kenan in the book. So could you talk a little bit about what is it about the writing that's cathartic, and how should somebody start if they want to do that? So Emillio has recently she did a beautiful piece for New York Magazine. You've been in the New York Times, you've been in Quartz. So you've just sold so many great pieces. So what is it about the writing that helps or that's cathartic?
It's liberation, pure and simple. And I've always said that that the best part of my life started when I met Susan Shapiro, and she helped me find my voice, because I found out what it was like to be me, and to express, to be me, and to not be afraid. And I will never forget, when I write these difficult pieces, and I always have your voice in my head, the piece that you're the most afraid to write about, that's the piece that you need to publish. And I always have that in my voice. I said, I'm afraid to unleash this, to submit this, to speak it outside of my head. And I was like, but fucking Susan Shapiro is in my head. And it's just like, it needs to be expressed, because this is my truth. This is my life, and this is who I am, and I'm not apologetic for it. So that's what it means to be for me. And obviously, hopefully getting a book deal and continue to be published, it's just motherfucking gravy. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's awesome, but it helps me to be me. And that's what I love about it.
There's a rule that I have in my classes, which is the first piece you write that your family hates means you found your voice. So let me go to my students first, then we'll go to the teachers. So Sharisse, so what is it about the writing that's so cathartic? And in your case, you've published a lot. And as we mentioned, your mother helps you with pieces, and you came out with just really difficult stuff to write. And what is it about it? Is it the writing itself, or the validation of getting it published?
It's kind of two things. So as I said, my oldest and my youngest kids, there's like a 10-year age gap. So before I had my second batch of kids, I knew I was gonna always write about what happened to me. I've been writing about this since I think I was a junior at CSUN back in California, but I always wrote about it in fiction. I never, disclosed that this was me. when I decided I wanted to write the story, and I think my daughter was 3 years old at the time, I really started writing to her. It was really writing to her, almost like you would tell someone about your life. It just really just kind of writing my story that I wanted her to one day read when I thought she was old enough and ready. I never thought that she would have read it several times already now, and she's just now 14. So it really came from needing help to tell the story. And then once I told it, and it was like, it just felt so powerful. Like, okay, this is out, this is true. It doesn't matter whether somebody believes me or not. I know this is my truth. And when so many people responded so positively to me, it gave me strength that I wish I would have had, like when I was 12 and 13 and 14 and going through all of that. And so every time, for all the people that still doubt me or say, no, that couldn't have happened or blah, 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 there's always someone that emails me or sends me a message on Twitter or Facebook. This happened to me. You know, thank you for writing this. Or there's always validation in that. And yes, of course, I would love to have a book deal. I better get a book deal. But one day I would love to have a book deal.
Wait, you have a great title. Say the title for your memoir.
The title is In Spite Of.
In Spite Of. I love it.
I would love for that to happen, but really it's just the story needs to be told. People need to know, they need to understand that this happens, and they need to have empathy when it does.
Great. And Kenan, as I write about, and as you mentioned, early on, when I said to you that the first assignment I give to my students is write about your most humiliating secret, you laughed at me and you said, you Americans, why the hell would anyone do that? And I said, you know, because it's healing and because editors are interested in those stories. And you seemed like you didn't believe me. And I remember I sent you Danielle Gelfand's beautiful piece about being with her mom who survived the Holocaust. And the first piece you wrote got accepted to the New York Times Magazine and was in an anthology, and the literary agent called you. So aside from congratulations, I said, fuck you. And I think you were kind of stunned that anybody wanted to hear your story. So could you talk, so there was really an external validation because you were a 12-year-old when it happened, and, you know, you felt very, you know, hurt and damaged by everything that happened. But all of a sudden, the first time that you tried to tell your story, you actually had, I mean, you wound up New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Slate, Salon, Penguin, Houghton Mifflin. So really there was fascination. So was it the external validation that people wanted to hear the story, you think, that helped you? You have to unmute.
I think I was surprised that they wanted to learn about Bosnia because it was such a forgotten time period. And I realized over time it was my best way to preserve the memory. And as you know, we're putting those pieces together and we're wondering, you know, can this turn into a book? And we realized that most of the books on Bosnia about the subject were written by older acclaimed Western journalists. But we wanted to tell the story through the eyes of a 12-year-old boy, now as American citizen, juxtaposed again with American citizen coming in and trying to make sense of what happened to him. So all the panelists have mentioned all the great reasons to write, and I didn't want to repeat them because they're all amazing. But there was, for me, you know, that was like the best way, not only to preserve memory, but my biggest revenge for all those crimes our old neighbors and friends have committed against innocent civilians. So it was a one big F you to all of them. And there isn't a better way to mention the shame but put it on a piece of paper. And I think you're using that idiom about the pencil being something, a sword.
I remember, right, I said to you, the pen is mightier than the sword, and you said, wow, that's great. And I'm like, I didn't invent that. but you never heard that American expression, the pen is mightier than the sword. So for you, it was really, right?
Yeah, but I also feel vulnerable because all these people are beginning to learn your story, and then, you know, you don't want to share, you know, yourself to the world. You realize that the book is only a small part of you. There's more to a person than an article and, you know, the whole book. So.
Awesome. Now, Kate, as a writing teacher, you've helped so many people publish essays and, you know, and develop their voice. So could you, you know, based on your own experiences, could you talk about, you know, just to inspire other people, and what great things, you know, why is it good for people to write about this kind of stuff?
Well, as people have said, it's cathartic. I certainly am not doing it for the money. It was very validating to publish the book. I had published lots of essays, but to be able to put this big story all together in a book form was major. and it took years to write and years till I could figure out what the main story was. And once I figured that out, then I was able to cut a lot of stuff. But it's just makes you feel good to be able to get this out there, to get it on the paper and to get it published and to have other people read it. So
What was
I
the
don't know.
biggest thrill for you? Was it when the editor, the great editor from Heliotrope, Naomi Rosenblatt, was it when she read it and said, I love this? Or was it when you held the book in your hand?
I think it was when she said, I want to publish this. Yeah, I mean, and getting the book in my hand, that was a big thrill too. Both of
Awesome.
them.
And I hear you're working on a new book. So
Well, I
that's
hope so. I'm talking to her next week. I'm hoping my new book hopefully is going to be a memoir and essays about living in New York during the pandemic. I've been writing a lot of them, publishing them, and hopefully putting it together in a book.
awesome. Now, Alison has 1 million students in California. I love all your students. In fact, she sends me some California people. I send her all my New York people. And again, you help so many people get published. So could you talk about that? Like, do you find it's cathartic for you when you're able to, I know you do mostly journalism, but when you do the essays, is that cathartic for you? And doing your book, was that cathartic? And what's it like helping other people publish their truth?
Absolutely. So I have to say, first of all, that there's a reason why we trade students, and that seems to work so well, is because this is how I feel about the space that you create, Sue, is that you give people the license to be human. And that is such a gift. I mean, what we're doing here is sharing our lowest points, our traumas, and a little light about how we maybe overcame those big hurts and were able to evolve. That's holy, that's sacred, and that's a sacred journey. And so I feel like as writing professors, as I guess leaders, people who bring people together, it's such a gift. It's such an act of generosity. So I feel like that's part of why you do it, in addition to these amazing book deals. And it's kind of why I do it too. I mean, I have people who come into class who say, just like what Emillio said about you, which is like, this experience has changed my life. Someone not only told me it was okay to tell my story, but that they listened, right? And that is such an act of generosity. So I guess that's how I view my work, both as an essayist and a memoirist and as a writing professor. What was I going to say? Yeah, a really close friend read the advanced draft of my memoir, and she said, oh my God, Alison, did you really have to be so honest? And I said, basically, if you're not going to put it on the page, if you're not going to be vulnerable, then there's no point to doing this. I mean, like, part of it, I was like chatting with Emillio, like, as part of it is being an emotional warrior. It's not that this doesn't take a toll on you. It doesn't hurt. It's sort of the point. Like, if I'm brave, I embolden you to be brave. If I tell my story, I invite you to tell your story. And I feel like that's why I'm here. And if I have one thing on my tombstone, I guess that it would be like, she dared to tell her story and welcome me to tell mine. So that's what I get out of it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And when I did my memoirs, some friends, especially maybe from Michigan, conservative friends would ask me, oh my God, you wrote about all these horrible relationships and addictions. That's what happened. And I was like, what happened? Well, I made a lot of money. It was really fun. I'm teaching at NYU, Columbia, and the New School. I get to write for all these great editors. I have the most awesome husband in the world. Our marriage is never better. Like, I couldn't think of any negative thing that happened. And people, but the assumption was, oh my God, you put it out there, this terrible thing's going to happen. And it's actually just the opposite. It actually made my life, things just got so exciting. And like you, the happiest I ever feel is when somebody reads the book and says, you liberated me, or I felt that way too, or and part of the reason I appreciated your story so much was that when I was having my own narcissistic wound where I couldn't figure out this relationship, when I was writing about forgiveness, or by hearing other people's stories, much more extreme and much more intense, and the traumas, and people sharing how they got over it without the apology that they wanted, but they could still learn to forgive and or thrive without the forgiveness was, it was, so that's when I actually knew that I had a book, because is there wisdom to share? And by taking everyone's wisdom and putting it out there, it really helped me. So we're going to move to the other Zoom so that we could see everybody and we could do a question answer. But is there anything else that you guys want to add in terms of, before we go, in terms of, the forgiveness stories that you shared and the inspiration about being able to talk about them and write about them? Is there anything else that anybody wanted to mention?
I'd just like to add that when I was writing my book, I was in Sue's private workshop, and which met every week, and I got a lot of feedback. And Sue gave me really good advice about, because I was writing about my ex, and I was really angry about, you got to trash yourself as much as you trash the other person, and to be more self-deprecating. And I mean, that was like really great advice, which I would give to everyone. If you're Sue's student, I'm sure you've heard that before. So I just wanted to add that.
When I was writing the book, 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, our writing group, very tough critics, always get tough critics. But I remember they said, if he's just a jerk, then you're a jerk for going out with him, and I'm not interested in either of you. So when you've been writing about a relationship, a love relationship especially, a really good thing to do is to remember why you fell in love and start with all the great stuff with somebody. And then what happens is then readers are interested, so that when your heart gets broken, their heart gets broken too, and they're much more engaged. Yeah, and so my rule is you have to question, challenge, trash, and out yourself more than anybody else that you're writing about. And interestingly, as much as we've talked about, like with Kenan, that it was cathartic and maybe got a little bit of revenge in there, actually a screed where you just write about all the horrible things that happened to you doesn't even work. Like nobody even wants to buy that. So there has to be self-awareness and an emotional arc usually, anyway, to make it publishable, I think.
I would just like to add one more thing, if I may, Susan.
Please.
So it's, everything is just, I always think of the sage words of the late, great Carrie Fisher. It's like resentment. You know where I'm going with this. Resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And with your book, it's just like, forgiveness is a gift you give to yourself, And not only does it help you, but it helps others that are around you and that you will interact with, hopefully. So
well, one of the things that I love the most about the book, because I was trying to be nuanced, because basically the $1 billion forgiveness industry promotes radical forgiving everybody everything, which I don't think is a good idea. So I actually loved hearing stories like Kenan's and Kate's and Manny, the Holocaust survivor, who actually did not forgive and thrived out of spite. So I think that there's a way that one can try to forgive or see different perspectives, but at a certain point, if the person or the country who hurt you doesn't give you what you deserve, which is an explanation, and there's 4 elements to a good apology. It's the explanation, the expression of regret, the promise you'll never do it again, and the reparation. But a lot of times you just can't get that. So what I loved about some of the stories is that, for example, Kenan, by speaking out about the injustice, because he never forgave the Serbs for what they did to his country, but by speaking out against the injustice, he healed himself. So I love that too, because you don't necessarily, I think there are some sins that maybe are unforgivable. I mean, a genocide or a Holocaust, maybe that is unforgivable, but it doesn't mean that you can't heal.
Absolutely. Like what happened, like what happened to Kenan, and obviously Holocaust survivors and other people that go through horrific things that could never, ever, ever be explained. It's power, but it gives you power. It gives you choice, and that's like the biggest thing about forgiveness to me. It's like, it gives you a choice, and it gives you a choice to die, or it gives you a choice to,
Manny Mandel, the Holocaust survivor in the book, one of the things I love the most about him is he's a psychotherapist. And he said, he told me in the interview that he spent his whole career teaching people that they have choices. And even if it's just a tiny half step at a time, you have a choice. And as long as you have a choice and you can move forward, that can be liberating. So I love that. That's exactly right. Alison, did you have something to add?
Gosh, I feel a little caught off guard. Sorry. I think that the biggest thing I want to say is that I didn't realize how deeply moved I would be by the subject.
Mm.
And it really is almost like the biggest adventure we can take in life is to learn how to overcome these traumas and forgive each other, and to move to some happier place. So I'm really grateful for you in this book. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm grateful for all of you. Sharisse, yes.
I just wanted to say something really quickly. I mean, I think it is relevant, but I remember there was a quote. That's what I was looking for. There's a quote somewhere that says something about if you seek revenge, you should dig 2 graves. It's definitely a better way to say it, but I'm sure most of you have heard it. And my mother was actually the first person that said that to me. But she was talking about an ex that did something to me that I probably wanted to kill or something and was trying to plot. But ever since she said that to me, you know, I look at that in terms of forgiveness, right? Because if you spend your time trying to go after someone who's wronged you, whatever they've done, you really kind of lose your life in
Good.
that.
The cliche is living well is the best revenge, but I always tell my students publishing well is the best revenge.
This is true.
Okay, so let's move to the other Zoom. When we go to the other Zoom, we'll have all the panelists here so you can ask them questions and we can interact. So see you in 2 minutes.